To make the templates for section 4, we have to do things a little differently. I'm going to start out by just making my red lines 1/16 of an inch in on the openings on these two sides, and also the opening up here. Just those openings. So I'll get that done. So I've just made the red lines on the 3 sides of each of these openings and around all 4 sides up here. I'm going to cut on the red lines, then I'll cut on the vertical black lines and the horizontal black lines, and also just cut right across on these funny red lines so that you'll have 3 templates. So now I have these 3 pieces cut out. Save this because we're going to need to cut this in a few minutes to make another template. And then cut out of scrap white cardstock 2 pieces that are 2 inches by 10. 2 at 2 inches by 10. So I'll do that and then I'll be back. So here are my 2 pieces that are 2 inches by 10, and I'm going to take one template and attach it exactly even with the bottom on one side, and one exactly even with the bottom on the other side, and then I'm going to trace around that opening. So now I have those 2 openings traced, and I'm going to take this one and line it up even with the top and trace around that opening. Now I'm going to cut out my traced openings, and when I do that I'll make sure that I leave the line behind so that my opening ends up being the exact size that it was to begin with. Once you've cut these openings, you want to trim 1/16 of an inch from both the top and the bottom. Not the sides, just the top and the bottom, 1/16 of an inch. So before we can test these out and do any fine tuning, just like in section 3, because we have these notched sides, the sides were not glued together, we need to add some finishing strips along the sides. And I just took some of my joining strips and folded them so that the score tape is on the inside, and I'll run them down the length, and here on this interior I'll cut 2 pieces, one for the top and one for the bottom. So I'll go ahead and get that done. Once you have your edges finished off, you can put some temporary adhesive on your templates and do a little fitting and fine-tuning. And the top part should fit nicely on one of the sides that doesn't have the notch. When we cut out those sides, we'll just omit cutting out this notch. We'll cut 2 sides with just a window at the top, and the other 2 sides using the window at the top and the 2 notches. We have 2 other templates to cut, and those are used for the back wall and the floor in our niche. And for the back wall, we'll mark a line 1/16 of an inch inside of the black line here, and then cut it off exactly even on both sides and join those 2 together. And then for the floor, remember we traced our piece of chipboard, so we'll go ahead and measure in 1/16 of an inch on all 3 sides of that triangle. So once we have these 2 pieces cut out, we can fit them in. I'm just going to put some temporary adhesive on the back of my floor. Hold the 2 front corners back 1/16 of an inch from that edge and push down the 2 sides in here. use my fingernail, and then you can also take a pencil if you want to. And then cut off a 1/16 of an inch inside of those two lines. And we'll do something similar for the back. We'll keep this piece flat. Get it lined up in the center there. Use your thumbnail to crease those sides, and you can also then take a pencil. And while you're doing that, you can take a look and make sure that the ceiling, that angle is fitting the way you want it to fit. We'll cut this off a 1/16 of an inch inside of these two lines that we drew. And those will be the templates for the niches. So those are the templates for section 4. This is the paper that I've selected for section 4. I'll start out by cutting 4 strips that are 2 inches in width, and then I'll use my templates for the 2 sides with the notch in it, and then I'll just use the window part of the templates for the other 2 sides that do not have the notch. So I have my paper all cut out and inked and then prepped with score tape. And just like other buildings, there are some sides we don't want to attach the paper to yet. And in the case of building 4, it is the 2 sides without the notches. The 2 sides without the notches, don't put the paper on yet. And you can put the paper on the 2 sides that have the notch. So I'll go ahead and get that done. These are the 2 papers I've selected for the back wall and the floor in my niche. So I've put my templates down, and I'll go ahead and cut them out, ink them, and get them installed. And so there are those 2 little pieces of pattern paper on the back of the niche. We can go ahead and do the roof for section 4 right now, and we'll start out by using some of our inside out joining strips and put them on each of these edges, making a nice point up here at the top of the peak. And when I do this, I put one side on and I use my scissors to trim it off, and then I put the other side on. I've cut it long to begin with, and then I'll just use my scissors to cut those ends off as well. And I use just some fine detail scissors. And then to do the 2 opposite sides, I take a piece that's longer than it needs to be, and I hold it up to that top, and I trim off that corner so that it'll be just right before I put it on. Then I'll put it on and cut off that bottom excess, and repeat that for the other side. So this is the paper I've chosen for the sides of my roof, and I'm going to mark it on the wrong side since it's white and I can see it more easily. And I'm going to start out by marking off 2 rows that are 2.5 inches tall. And then on the bottom end, I'm going to measure in 2.5, and then at 5, and then at the top I'm going to measure in 1.25 inches, and then from there I'll measure over 2.5, and I'll connect these dots, and I'll get 3 roof sides this way since my paper is not directional. If your paper was directional, you would just use this one and this one, and then make 2 more on the next row. But I can get a 3rd one over here, and I like to put an X on the 2.5 inch side because they are difficult to tell apart. And then I'll make 1 more triangle up here the same way, measure over 2.5, and then 1.25, and connect those dots. Now I have 4 pieces here, and I'll cut those out. And before I put score tape on them, I'll do a dry fit. I may need to trim a little bit off. When we put something together like this, we don't gain an exact 1/16 of an inch on each side. So just be prepared to make a little adjustments, and then put the appropriate side on each one, and then just ink and put them on with score tape. And here's our little roof. So that's our side 4. We have paper on the roof, inside the niche, and 2 sides to begin with, and we've left the paper off of these 2 sides for right now. To make our template for section 5, I'm not marking in a 1/16 of an inch on the 2 outside verticals. Everything else I'm marking in a 1/16 of an inch, but not on the 2 verticals. And I'll go ahead and cut that out on those red lines. And then on the center panel, just the one that has the gable end, I'll mark in a 1/16 of an inch inside of the black line and cut out a template to use for the niche. The bottom one I can just cut a rectangle, and I don't need to do anything special. So I'll go ahead and get those templates cut out. And once you have those templates cut out, just go ahead and do a test fit for both of them and do any tweaking that you might need to do. To cut our decorative paper, we have this template for the 2 wide sides, and then for the narrow sides we can do a little measuring, and it is 2 inches wide, and it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.25 inches tall. So I'm going to subtract 1/8 of an inch from both of those measurements, and I'll cut pieces that are 1 7/8 by 6 1/8, and that'll give me a 1/16 of an inch reveal all around. So I have this template, and of course for the side with no holes in it, we obviously won't cut any holes out of there. And then this is the paper that I've selected for the outside of section 5. So I'll go ahead and get my pieces cut out. So I have my decorative paper all cut out and inked, and I have score tape on the back. And on this solid piece I've got several extra stripes of score tape because the extension will get attached to this piece. Now before we put any paper on, we'll mark our 2 sides that don't get paper at this point. The first one is the back, the solid piece, that does not get paper. And then if you turn it so that that side is facing to the right, the niches are facing to the left. This other side, put an X on it. We won't put the paper on that. So we can put the paper on the niche side and the side next to it on the left. So I'll go ahead and get that accomplished. So for the backs of the 2 niches, I am again using this kind of checkerboard paper. I've put my template on one, and to see how big this back piece is, I'm just measuring the width of my template, which is 2 3/4, and so the back for the bottom needs to be 7/8 by 2 3/4, and that's because this opening is 1 inch tall, and so we just take 1/8 of an inch off of that. And for the floors, I've cut a strip that's 5/8 inch wide, and it will be the same width, so 5/8 by 2 3/4, and we'll do 2 of those, and I'm using this dark orange again for that. So I'll go ahead and get those pieces cut and inked and installed. And there are the niche papers installed. Before we put paper on the extension, we want to finish some of these edges. Now, we definitely need to put a finishing strip on the 2 back edges, and then you can take a look at your front edges and see how they look. You may decide that it doesn't need to have a finishing strip on there, or you may want to put one on. So go ahead and put those strips on, and make sure you cut them off even with the edges. Now that I have my edges all finished and I decided to do my front ones, they just look a lot nicer now, I'm going to measure the width of my sides. And this one is 1 1/4 inches. They should both be the same. This one is also 1 1/4 inches. So I'm going to cut a strip of paper 1 1/8 inches wide by 12 inches long. 1 1/8 inches by 12 inches long, and that'll give us a 1/16 inch reveal on either side. So I'll cut that and then I'll be back. So this is my strip of paper, and I'm going to hold it so it's slightly above this diagonal edge. I'll put a little repositionable on there so that I can move it around, and then I'm going to center it in that side so I have my 1/16 inch reveal. And then I'll turn it on the inside, and I'll make a mark or just use my scissors and cut that off. Now that I've done that, I'm going to pick this up and move it down a 1/16 of an inch and stick that repositional back on, and I'm going to draw a line across the bottom here. I've got a line here, and I'm going to cut it a 1/16 of an inch short of that line. And I'm going to stick it back on that side with repositionables so I don't forget that I've already done that side. Now, because I'm using this paper that has a pattern, I'd kind of like it to match up. You don't need to worry about that if you don't want to, but what I'm going to do is cut it so that it is the bottom line is even with that pattern here. But you know, it's not a big deal. That's just kind of the way I roll. So I'm going to cut that off even. And because I did that, this time I'm going to start it a 1/16 of an inch up from the bottom, and then I'll mark the top. So I marked the top, and now I'll cut that a 1/16 of an inch shy. So now I have my 2 sides, and I just need to get my front on here, and I'm going to measure my front. Yours may be slightly different. Mine measures 2 1/16. Now I don't mind working with 16ths. If you don't want to, you could just call that 2 inches. But I'm going to write down that it's 2 1/16 wide, and then for the height it is 4 inches. And so I'm going to subtract 1/8 of an inch from that, so that'll be 1 15/16 wide and 3 7/8 inch high. And I'll cut a piece to fit on there. And because I'm watching my pattern, I'll try to get that to match going across there. So there are my 3 pieces, and I'll go ahead and ink them up and put them on with score tape. So here's the little extension with its paper on it, and that is section 5 for now. For section 6, we'll use the template that we traced when we cut out the original opening in this box, and just check your template. It should measure 3 1/8 across from side to side, and if it doesn't, just go ahead and make that correction. You want some nice straight lines to begin with. So I'm just making a couple of tick marks here, and then I'm going to straighten up that line and just make so I know I have a really good straight line to begin with. And then up here at this peak, from the very bottom to that peak, it should measure 7 3/4 inches. And so if it doesn't, go ahead and make that correction before we start subtracting any of our 1/16ths of an inch. Now, once you're satisfied that you've got those good external dimensions, we can go ahead and put our 1/16th of an inch reveal on. We're going to do it on every single edge, and we're going to do it outside of the niche as well. And then what I would recommend that you do, if you've got it on cardstock, is I'm just going to write niche 6 on here, so that I know that this side faces up, because I know that my curve is not completely symmetrical. So I'll put my red lines on there and a 1/16th of an inch away, and then I'll also cut out my niche a 1/16th of an inch inside of that pencil line. And that way I'll have a template for the niche and a template for the side of the building. And then once you have those two templates cut out, go ahead and place them on your building and do any fine-tuning that you need to do. So now we have a template for the back and the front, and we need to see how big of a rectangle we need for the sides. And this one measures 2 inches wide, and find my long ruler, and it is 7 inches tall. So 2 inches wide and 7 inches tall. That means we need to cut 2 strips 1 7/8 inches by 6 7/8 inches for the sides. 1 7/8 inches by 6 7/8 inches, and you should have the same measurements on yours. So this is the paper I'm going to use for this section. I'll cut out my template using my templates and the measurements we just took, and I'll go ahead and ink them and prep them with score tape, but I won't attach them yet. I have my paper all cut out and inked and prepped with score tape, and on this wide one I've got some extra score tape going the length, because on the back of this building there is a dormer and a porch roof and a porch. So we want to make sure we get good adhesion between our decorative paper and the chipboard. So before we put this on, there are 2 sides that we don't want to put paper on. The 2 sides that do not get paper at this point on section 6 are the plain wide back side, and then if you turn that to the left so that the niche opening is on the right, this side does not get paper as well. So we'll put paper on the niche and then the side to the right of the niche. For the decorative paper inside of the niche, I used my template and cut a piece of this orange checked paper, and then out of this striped paper, which is 5/8 of an inch wide like it is for all of the floors in the niches, I just cut it the same length as this side here because I knew that would fit. So I'll go ahead and put those pieces in. So there's the decorative paper on the inside of the niche. Next we'll work on paper for the porch, and I'm going to start here. This is the porch floor, and it measures 1.25 inches by 3 1/8, 1.25 inches by 3 1/8. So we'll subtract 1/8 from each side. So that paper is going to be 1 1/8 by 3. And I'm going to use this orange paper for that, and I'll have a nice little reveal all around the edges. And then for the porch base, first I want to put some finishing strips on. And so I'm going to take some of my strips and just go on all 4 of the long edges. Now for the porch base, we only need decorative paper on one long side and then both of the short ends. So this unit stands 1 inch tall and it's 3 inches long, so this piece is going to be 7/8 by 2 7/8. And then the 2 ends, which measure 1 inch square, we'll cut them 7/8 square. So I'm going to get those 2 parts put together, and then we'll come back and do the roof. So now that I have the base covered with paper, I'm going to turn my attention to the little roof. And the first thing I want to do is to wrap this with some black cardstock. And so I'm going to cut a piece of black cardstock that is 3 1/8 by 4. 3 1/8 by 4 inches. Now that I have my piece of cardstock, I'm going to do some scoring. I have the 4-inch side up here at the top, and I'll score at 5/8. Then at 1 1/8, and then at 2 5/8. So that was 5/8, 1 1/8, and 2 5/8. And I'll use my bone folder to crease on those. So the way this will go on our roof is that the first side goes underneath, and the underneath is the short side. And then we'll wrap, and it should meet back exactly. Now I'm going to run some score tape on the edges and probably on by the crease on the bigger parts. So this is how our piece goes on, and this is where I put score tape. I put a piece in this channel that goes on the back here because that's going to get glued to the building, and we want that to be nice and sturdy. So I'm going to start this by, always remember that the shorter of these 2 sides is the bottom. So I'm going to start this on the bottom and then wrap it around like so. So start this on the bottom and wrap, 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 and come back. And that will put some nice base on that porch. And once you have the paper on there, go ahead and give it a good burnish. Now the only place I think I'm going to put decorative paper is just on the top. You won't be able to see underneath the roof, and I think these little triangles are too tiny to mess with. So let's measure the top. And the top measures 1.5 inches by 3 1/8. So 1.5 inches by 3 1/8. we'll cut our paper 1 3/8 by 3. 1 3/8 by 3. And I'm going to use this checker paper for that roof. So we won't attach the porch floor until we finish construction, but we have our little base, and we have the floor, and we have the little roof that will go above. So that's the decorative paper to this point. There is a dormer that goes on the outside of this section, but we're going to work on all the dormers together at once. The template for box 7 is pretty straightforward. We'll draw our red lines inside 1/16 of an inch on the edges and outside 1/16 of an inch on both of the openings. And then to get a template for the top opening, I'll also draw a line inside of my original black lines 1/16 of an inch and cut out that template. So now that I have both templates cut out, I can test them on section 7 and see if any fine tuning is needed. So I have my template ready for the wide side of the building, and now I just need to take some measurements for the side, and it measures 1 3/4 inches wide by 4 3/4 inches tall. We'll subtract 1/8 of an inch from each one of those, so that gives us 1 5/8 wide by 4 5/8 tall for our two side pieces. And this is the paper that I've selected for this building, so I'll go ahead and get all of my pieces cut out, inked, and prepped with score tape. So I have all my paper cut out and inked and prepped with score tape on this side that has nothing on it. I did put some extra score tape on the back here just because the bay window will get attached to that side. And before we put this on, we need to mark for two sides that we won't put the paper on yet. And this time we're not going to put the paper on the side with the openings. So no paper on the side with the openings. And then if you turn that side to the right, so the openings are over here on the right and the flat plain side is on the left, put an X on this side because we won't put paper on this narrow side. So we'll put paper on the flat wide back and the other narrow side. So I'll go ahead and get that done. So for the niches, we already have a little template for the top part, and I'm just going to measure that width, which is 1 7/8, and I can use that same width on the bottom rectangle down here, and then the height of this rectangle starts at 2 1/4, so if we subtract 1/8 of an inch, that'll be 2 1/8. So our bottom rectangle for the back will be 1 7/8 by 2 1/8, and I'm going to use this flowered paper for that. And then for the floors, they start out at 5/8 inch width, and they will be 1 7/8 inch long, since that is the width that we have for our templates. So I'll go ahead and get those pieces cut and installed. And there's the paper in the niches, and then on these two sides And there's a bay window that goes on the outside here, but we'll do that when we do the other windows. So that is section 7.